Hello, my name is Ted Scalzo, Education Specialist for Make Music. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to our guest clinicians for the National Jazz Festival Smart Music category sponsored by Make Music, Alfred Publishing, creators of Finale and Smart Music. Here with us today are Alan Baylock, Mike Kamuf, and Rick Hirsch. Before I share a little about each clinician, I would like to inform all of you that the National Jazz Festival's mission is to provide an outlet for cultivating a jazz community and inspiring jazz education for young musicians. From the National Jazz Festival, joining us today is Amanda Cooley, Executive Director, and Addie O'Byrne, Director of Development. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Ted, for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. We appreciate this and happy to meet you all.
Wonderful. So our clinicians, we'll start with Alan Baylock. He's the director of the 1 O'Clock Band at the University of North Texas. He is a composer-arranger with many titles published by Alfred Music and in Smart Music. I will also add he was the former leader of the Airmen of Note. Alan also judged the composition category for National Jazz Festival, and the winner had the honor of having their composition recorded by the North Texas University's 1 O'Clock Band. Welcome, Alan.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here. Appreciate it.
Great. Next is Mike Kamuf, composer-arranger with many pieces written for jazz band, concert band, and orchestra published in Alfred Music, also available in Smart Music. Mike is currently a middle school band director in Maryland and just let us know that he's retiring and will be leaving his current teaching position. And we're looking forward to seeing what he does in the future. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Ted. Great to be here.
Great. And our final clinician is Rick Hirsch from State College, PA. He is a composer, arranger, and jazz educator with many jazz ensemble pieces published in Alfred and available in Smart Music. Earlier this spring, Rick was busy arranging music for the Yellow Jackets, one of my favorite groups. Welcome, Rick.
Thanks, Ted. Thank you.
So what I wanted to do is get your opinions. We're going to put a general question out there, and maybe we'll start with, we'll go in this order. We'll have Alan, Mike, and then Rick in that order. And gentlemen, I just want to thank you for your time today. It's an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to be with you. You were all kind of heroes of mine, and I've played every one of your charts, all three of you. We're so fortunate to have you here, and we're looking for you to share what your experience has been like listening to the band that participated in the National Jazz Festival, Smart Music category, and offer your vision of what you think their future could be. What advice would you give them to raise their skills and performances to the next level? So Alan, how about you start us off?
Sure, yeah, I really enjoyed listening to the bands. And one aspect that I appreciated in particular was the level of improvisation. So often we hear tight ensembles with decent intonation and the articulations and the cutoffs, but the solos suffer. So the reverse, when the solos are great and the ensemble is, let's just say, not attended to enough, also is a problem. But I think there was a good balance from the bands I heard of good ensemble playing, but also good improvisation. And for me, any advice would just be to continue to listen to the music. And it sounds cliche, and you'll hear it from everybody and have heard it from everybody, but it's so incredibly important to listen to what has come before us. Because as writers, as Mike and Rick know, we can't write everything on the page that you're supposed to do, because it's Mozart's notation. It's European classical music notation. The bulk of it is. So how do you get that to swing? Well, you have to listen to it and listen to it intensely. So that would be my advice. I think the bands are well on the way, but listening is a critical element to taking those next steps.
Oh, great. Thank you for those great words of advice. Mike, what's your take on all this?
Well, I agree with Alan. The level of the improv was great to hear. My piece of advice would be to make sure that the soloists understand the confines of each arrangement. So, like when you're, where to peak. In other words, where to make that solo go to. And as far as the ensemble playing goes too, the same thing, like making sure that we're all like actually not just playing the notes on the page, but we're actually making the music come alive, like Alan's alluding to. The notation is one thing, but making that music come alive is something totally different. So I think making sure that we, as players and as educators, make sure that the students are really making that music come alive and making sure that they know where each arrangement is driving towards. If that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Rick, how about you?
I think Mike and Alan have said it all, man. The bands were really excellent, and everybody in the bands we heard is really on the right track. And so I think if they just keep moving in the direction they're going in, good things will happen.
All right, great.
Well, can I say one more thing? I was really impressed with the fact that the musicianship was that strong coming off of COVID. You know what I'm saying? Like I expected to not hear, because I know it's been a struggle in my own teaching to get details and consistency on details within an ensemble, and I thought that was really great too. I left that out. Sorry, but I thought that was impressive.
Yeah, Mike, that's actually a very good point in regards to what all of our music education programs have gone through with COVID and coming back and recovering, and getting students used to being a team again in a room versus virtual and online and those kinds of events that we had. Next question I'm going to ask you guys. I'm pretty sure that the students and the directors would probably like to know a few things about you. So let's actually, since Mike, you're on screen, let's ask you. What I'd like is a brief background on how you got to be a jazz artist. Who inspired you? Who got you started? What was your beginning like?
Well, I grew up listening to all kinds of great music in my house. My father was a drummer and had an incredible record collection. They took me to different performances. I got a chance to hear Maynard Ferguson's band, the Buddies band, Stan Getz, Earl Fava Hines, Lane, Preservation Hall Jazz Band, like all at a very, very young age. So his love of music and my parents' love of music, my dad's especially, was a key factor in that. So that kind of got he got that rolling in me, and I just kind of ran with it. And the experiences that I had listening to music with him and things that he hit me to at a very young age, I think that really played a pivotal role for me.
Kind of cool that your parents were a driving force there. That's very very nice, to grow up in that environment. Rick, how about yourself?
My dad was not a musician. Well, he was a steering wheel drummer. He was driving and maybe banging on the steering wheel, but that's where it began and ended, except for the fact that he has always been a huge fan of music with really broad tastes. And so I remember as a kid, there would be Buddy Holly playing, and there would be Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash and tons of Sinatra. I mean, there was a radio program out of Philly he used to listen to. It was like Fridays with Frank, Sundays with Sinatra, and I think Saturdays was like the Francis Albert Showcase or something. So those sounds were just in the air in my house, and I always liked listening to music. But then in terms of inspiration, so I think that just kind of planted seeds, right? And maybe gave me some reference points. Somehow in ninth grade, I got into the high school jazz band. And when I say somehow, there's no false humility there at all. I just happened to play saxophone, and I heard that you could try out for the jazz band. So I did, and I got in. And in my high school in Delaware, it was jazz band was a class. We met for 42 minutes every day. I thought, okay, that sounds pretty cool. And at this point in my life, I was definitely more interested in baseball than playing music. Even though I probably wasn't that good at baseball. In my mind, I was headed for like the Yankees. But being in that jazz band every day, and we had a folder like that thick, and all we did was read. And our band director, Mr. Ross, would just say, all right, Tiger San Pedro, and pull it up and we'd play it, or attempt to play it. There was music in there from Woody's band and Buddy's band and Basie and a lot of Sammy Estico and Kenton, and we just read. And there was a wide range of people in the band, from a ninth grader who really didn't know anything to, and a lot of kids who were decent at their instruments and were into it. And then a couple kids who were like, there was a trombone player who was transcribing Bill Watrous solos, which to me was, that never had ever even occurred to me that you would want to do that, or that it was humanly possible to do that sort of thing. And being around a couple kids like Ken, the trombone player, and some upper class saxophone players and whatnot, and seeing them be really good at this kind of gave me the bug to think, I want to be good like them. And believe it or not, so it was really my peers who first kind of maybe incited that urge.
All right, that's a really great story and a great background. Alan, how about you?
Yeah, I'm fascinated at how different our upbringings were. My dad also and my mom were not musicians, but they did have a love of music. So music was important to us. And I was the sixth of six kids, and all of my older sisters and brother all played band instruments and played piano. So I grew up with those sounds in my head, falling asleep to hear my sister play flute. And, my brother, who's 8 years older, was a trumpet player. So although there was a lot of Johnny Cash in the house, and as close to jazz as we got, because I'm from a pretty small town just south of State College, actually, between Altoona and Johnstown, called Evansburg. It's the county seat of Cambria County. If you ever go by, it's a pretty hip town.
I hear they have a potato festival.
Yeah, an excellent potato festival. Yes. And so, there was some Herb Alpert, of course, in the racks at Jamesway, and Al Hurt, Louis Armstrong. We got a little bit of that. But in terms of live music, yeah, it was Maynard Ferguson, because Maynard toured everywhere. Mm-hmm. He would come to Somerset, he would come to Altoona. So we would drive when I was still in high school to see Maynard Ferguson. And I wanted to be Maynard Ferguson, or at least on his band. And I thought, when we talked to Hobie Freeman or whoever was in the trumpet section, I thought they had their life was made. I mean, they're touring with Maynard Ferguson. Their life is complete, So that was my goal, to be one of those two. But when we had hip band directors, of course, and there was my main band director in high school was Mr. McCurdy, and he was an Air Force vet himself. And he brought a lot of great music to our stage band. We didn't call it a jazz band, a stage band. And that was really the first time I got turned on to big band music. And he let me borrow all his scores, of course, which was vital in learning how to arrange and compose for myself, just studying all those scores. And I remember another trombone player who I was taking lessons with, even though I was a trumpet player. His name is Paul Walker, also from that area. And he was the first one that turned me on to stuff like Basie and, Thad Jones, Mel Lewis. And that was like my freshman, sophomore year in high school. And those sounds really piqued my interest as well. And then, my band director had Airmen of Note albums, which was very cool. He had some Chase albums, which also turned me on because I was a high trumpet freak. But then my brother brought home a Miles album, the first Miles album. And I don't think my brother dug it, but that was the first time I heard really small group jazz being played at that level. I had heard a lot of big band stuff. But the Miles thing was like, oh, I see. This is art. This isn't just music for music's sake. So yeah, those are some of the things. But also, I should mention that there's a radio station out of Pittsburgh. I can't remember their call letters, but they had a Sunday night jazz program, and I recorded it, and I still have the cassettes somewhere. I probably have 24 cassettes of those Sunday evening radio shows, and that's where I heard Duke Ellington for the first time, Freddie Hubbard, all Joe Henderson, all of the jazz staples, Horace Silver, although the DJ always said Horace Silvers, used to drive me bananas because I knew it was Horace Silver. Anyway, so I heard real jazz coming out of Pittsburgh as well. So those are the things I think that my informed band directors, the love of music that I grew up with in my family. I'm the only musician of the family. but they all still have a strong love for it. Yeah, just self-discovery after that, really.
So you have the WDUQ bootlegs, then I guess.
That's right. It may have been WDUQ. It may have been out of Duquesne. Yeah.
Or Tony Moab, I think.
It could have been.
Possibly. Possibly, yeah.
It may have been. Yeah, that was would have been early 80s, early 1980s. So yeah, that was really influential. Just to, again, it's like these guys are saying, it's just getting those sounds in your head. And I was kind of a jazz snob. I didn't think much of classical music at that time, and which was good for me because I got to be immersed. But I was taking classical trumpet lessons, which seemed much more difficult than playing jazz. So anyway, I love the freedom of jazz also, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think that is the one thing that unites us all, for sure. Now, you all mentioned you had a public school program, and I'm curious, did you guys attend jazz festivals? And whether you did or not, what do you think the benefits are to students participating in festivals like the National Jazz Festival, where they perform among their peers, get feedback from experienced adjudicators like yourselves? So Rick, you're on. How about if you share?
We did go to jazz festivals. And we were not a band that learned 3 songs and perfected 3 songs. We would, because like I said, we were reading every day. So we could, when it was festival season, we probably had, a half a dozen, 10 tunes. We just rotated through week to week. And but I remember going to some festivals, like there was always a great festival at Pennsauken High School in New Jersey, which is like Greater Philadelphia, and hearing the Pennsbury High School Jazz Band, which is from Bucks County. And to this day, I mean, probably for 50 years, that school has had these high school jazz bands, which sound professional. I remember hearing them going, what? Because, in your own high school, you're in your own little silo and you think, I'm in a jazz band. Oh, we're bad.
Yep.
Oh yeah, we're bad. We're the jazz band. We're pretty much the coolest kids at school. We're so good. And then you go hear another band that's way more advanced than you are. And it's humbling, but it's also inspiring. Like, well, maybe we could be that good next year, sort of thing. So I enjoyed that part of getting to hear the other kids from other schools. But it was also, on the flip side of that, nice to know you weren't in the worst band too. So that was, maybe fed the ego a little bit. But I also remembered clinics with Frank Tiberi from the Woody Herman Band, a much younger Dennis de Blasio. This was almost 40 years ago. So, I mean, he's still very youthful, hyped guy, and he was the same thing 40 years ago. And he was just such an enthusiastic persona. Remember hearing Grover Washington Jr. And so those sort of memories were, this stick out. And as well, as memories, sure, I remember that part, but they're also the parts that kind of kept us going, fan the flames. But we didn't, the jazz, at least the festivals we went to back then, were not quite the way they are now. I don't remember ever performing and then having an adjudicator come on stage or in a room with us and give us direct feedback and rehearse us. It was much more, you got the judge's tape and you would listen to it on the bus on the way home, or the comment sheet that the band director would tape on the chalkboard. You'd see it Monday morning. But I also remember we had to sight read. Sight reading was a part of those festivals and the competition. I don't even know if anybody does it anymore. You finished your set, then you went into another room and they put a piece of music. It was on the stand. The stands were turned around. And there are these rules, right? You put the music, okay, you got 5 minutes. 5 minutes, nobody's allowed to play a note. And then the band director's got to count it off.
Wow.
Go.
That's hardcore. That's hardcore.
That's old school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, how about you?
So I went to a Catholic high school outside of Cleveland, and we had, so it wasn't public school. We had, the school had a great music program. That's actually why I went there. And we had a stage band, like was previously mentioned. We rehearsed before school Tuesday and Thursday mornings. But we didn't do we just played the concerts and different events in the community and that. We did not go to jazz festivals or anything like that. Like the bands and the orchestra and the choirs did in the music department. We didn't do any of those kinds of things. The travel type things that we did were just kind of local events. We did bring Maynard Ferguson's band in, though. Our high school band director was there from, he opened the school in 1961, and he retired in the late 90s. And he brought in, over the years, had brought in Kenton, had brought in Basie, Buddy Rich, cool. You name it, Woody's band, and that rotation, we had convinced them to bring Maynard's band in. And it was in the spring of '83, and they recorded live at the Great American Music Hall, or live in San Francisco at the end of that tour. And we saw them at the beginning of that tour. My mom cooked for the band. It was great. My dad shot hoops with Greg Bissonette afterwards.
Nice.
So yeah, it was a really cool experience. And Maynard talked with all of us and everything, and it was a very cool thing. And so that was very inspiring. That was pretty neat. I saw him give a little kid came up, couldn't have been much more than 9 or 10 years old, and he was a trumpet player. This kid was enamored with him, and I saw Maynard give him a 3C mouthpiece, like right in the box, like Bach mouthpiece. It was cool, and they rehearsed. We actually got to hear the band rehearse on the sunny side of the street, the Dennis de Blasio chart, and I think we were the first. We heard the first performance of the chart, so it was kind of a unique experience to be sitting there and watching like Maynard rehearse the band and like then work out the kinks on an arrangement, and then like a few months later it comes out on a record. So that was a pretty cool experience.
Hey Mike, how did the Ganesha go down in a Catholic school?
Oh, we didn't have an auditorium, so we did it in another. It was actually a Brooklyn high school. It's on the west side of Cleveland, because we didn't have an auditorium. So we rented the auditorium and did it over there. It went down fine. Yeah, cool. The local radio station helped promote the gig and everything. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. So Ganesh, they did do that. They played that on that gig. That was like pretty amazing. And it was also cool to hear Maynard at the beginning of the tour, because it was like the second night. I think they played at Bowling Green the night before. University, and then we were the second night, and Maynard's chops were just like, it was like, holy cow, like it was unbelievable. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So that was inspiring. So no adjudications for me in that age level. That came like when I, not even really in college. We just, I went to Youngstown State. We played a lot of different things and played for schools and that, but we didn't really do that. Not till I became a teacher, my first year teaching in Cleveland, in Ohio. We did the Tri-C Jazz Festival in Cleveland, and that was a lot of fun. I think, I take that back. We actually did the Tri-C Jazz Festival as college students, because we got to work with Red Rodney and Ellis Marsalis in different years. It was pretty cool. So not too much of that, but until college. But yeah, so it was my experience with that.
Great. Alan, how about you?
Yeah, I also went to Catholic school. So we did county band, and that was it. There was no real festivals that we went to. However, we did do a ton of marching band competitions. So that was where we listened to taped feedback and got adjudicated. Of course, it was not just about the music, it was about other things as well. But I definitely saw it when I was living in DC, especially at the Chantilly Jazz Festival, which I know Mike was a part of, where those groups would come in, and they also had a sight reading component, which I think is brilliant. To see those bands not only hear each other, kind of what Rick was alluding to, so you get out of your own bubble and you can be inspired in many ways by hearing other bands of kids that are similar age. I wish I had that experience in jazz, but I only had it in marching band, which was obviously a completely different animal, and beautiful in its own way. Yeah, and it's good even at the level that we are here at North Texas. We were invited to the very first Jack Rudin Jazz Championship by Winton. So we went up there January of 2020, and there was 10 other college bands that were invited. And sure, it was a competitive thing, but just the camaraderie between the bands was incredibly important. But to hear other students the same age was really inspiring, and it was the most memorable part of that trip to New York. So I think the festivals are an amazing opportunity, again, for kids to get out of their bubble, to understand that there are many other people that play at a higher level that can be inspiring to them. So yeah, I mean, I survived without it, but I can see where it would have been a huge benefit. Just to get out of the small fish, a big fish in a small pond syndrome, which I certainly had.
It sounds like an underlying theme for all of you is the main benefit is the inspiration, and to realize that you are part of a bigger community than maybe just your 17 or 20 students that you're working with. So that message was well received and well articulated. Thanks for that. I'm wondering, Alan, what was the best advice given to you by another jazz artist, teacher, or mentor?
Yeah, I love that question. I think it was, it's probably my Mike Crotty, who was the chief arranger for the Airmen of Note for 26 years. We overlapped by just a couple years in the Air Force. He was a huge inspiration and always had little nuggets. And the gist of it was just to be yourself. And what I got from that was there's always room for a unique artist. So when Elvis came around, when Miles came around, when Joe Henderson came around, when Coltrane came around, when Charlie Parker came around, when Clifford Brown, J.J. Johnson, whomever, I was just mentioning men, of course, there's Mary Lou Williams and so many great women musicians as well. There was room for them because they had a unique creative voice. And I got that from Mike, where it's not discouraging, where, less informed people will say, well, where are all these musicians going to go? There's no more touring big bands. Where are these people going to work? How can you possibly take their money to get a degree? Well, again, there's always room for a unique artist. So when you find your own voice, you'll work and you'll have an impact. There's a place for you. If you find that, when you find that unique voice.
I love that. I love that response. Wonderful. Thank you. Hey, Mike, same question for you. What was the best advice given you by another artist, teacher, or mentor?
That's really, really a hard question. I've been thinking about this for a while. I don't know. I don't think it's just one thing of advice. I think for me, it was the lineage and long line of great mentors that I had that gave me many, many lessons. For me, it wasn't like one piece of advice or one specific piece of advice. I was just very, very fortunate to have had a long line of great role models and mentors along the way, starting with really my high school band director, then going on up to a team of people in my undergrad and then in my graduate work, and then just and then professionally, both in the Northeast Ohio area and here in the DC area. So for me, it hasn't been one piece of advice in particular. I've just been very, very fortunate to work with some great people who have steered me in different directions along the way and given me great advice along the way. I'm kind of dodging the question, sorry, but that's really, for me, that's really it. There's not one piece of advice or anything for me.
All right, Rick, how about you?
Mike, that sounds like just an honest reflection on how you got where you got.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I thought about this question yesterday and actually had the same takeaway that Alan did. And I didn't necessarily have a direct long-term mentor the way Alan had that relationship with Mike Crotty for a couple of years, but I have had opportunities to hang with some great musicians, and I've seemed to have gotten some of the greatest nuggets over coffee or lunch or a drink. So like a long time ago, I taught part-time at Penn State University, which is down the street from my house. And Jim McNeely came in, the composer, Jim McNeely came in for a festival. And I happened to be able to go out for a drink with Jim, and I picked up several nuggets from him just shooting the bull. But one of them was he looked over one of my big band scores, an original piece, and about 80% of the way through the score, is about 8 bars of the Harold Arlen tune "Get Happy." Just that much. And he looked at me and said, "Why is that there?" I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, is there some sort of reason, like a private joke or, some sort of deeper meaning?" I was like, "No, it's just kind of, that's where it went." And he said, and then he kind of shook his head or nodded, understanding, like, "Oh yeah, it just wouldn't go away." Those were his words. I was like, "You're right. That's exactly right. It wouldn't go away." And so I kind of gleaned from that. You just got to trust your ear or your instincts. And I spent a fair amount of time with Bob Mintzer because I used to be his copyist before he got Sibelius in 2005. And so I did it, I spent a lot of time on the phone with him, or a couple of times we were together. And, he'd send me a score and I'd be going through it and I'd call him back with like 100 questions about, is this note right? Is that supposed to be a flat? Blah, 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 whatever. And we talk, he's like, "No, those are actually the right notes in that measure." And he would just say something like, "That's just kind of what it was in the deep, dark recesses of my imagination. So I wrote it down." So again, he's saying, I just trusted my instinct because that's what it was. Cool. And so, and I have a shopping list of experiences like that. And they all kind of led me to the same takeaway, which is just kind of try not to second guess yourself too much and just go with it. Not everybody's going to like it. But as Alan said, it allows you to just be yourself and put it out there and not have me try to ape Mintzer's writing or ape McNeely, because I can never be Mintzer better than him or McNeely better than him. So I might as well just try to do what I can do.
I'm going to interject here. I would say you're highly successful.
That's very sweet.
But no, that's the truth because of that. And I've just recently become aware of your writing, and it's been on my go-to list now, and it's unique, and it's in SmartMusic, and I think it's a great addition to our catalog. So
thanks, Ted.
For you to share that was great.
Well, that's the neat thing about kind of piggybacking again off what Alan had said about just kind of be yourself, is like Alan is himself. He's got his own approach. Mike is himself. I hear a Kamuf chart and I go, "That's a Kamuf chart." I know, because it's like for me, a hallmark of Mike's writing is just the clarity of it. It's just, there's nothing extra. It's so clear and so well thought out, I love that about your writing, Mike. And Alan, your harmonic language is just, I don't understand it. But it's so compelling and interesting. I love it. So.
Great. So I'm going to ask Mike, what advice do you have for an aspiring jazz musician or writer?
Oh man, kind of what we're saying here. Take every opportunity you can to hang with somebody that's better than you, an inspiration to you, a mentor to you. Pick their brains. Listen as much as you can. I started, like Alan said about studying scores. I started studying scores like in 8th grade. That's how and listening to recordings. I didn't know whether that's what I was doing, but that's what I was doing. If you're interested in writing, the earlier you can do that. If you're interested in the playing aspect as much, if you're interested in soloing and finding those voices that you want to emulate in your playing, that's incredibly important. If you're trying to strive to be a lead player, finding those lead players on your instrument that are the voice of that instrument, that are the leaders in that, and trying to make sure that you just take in as much as you can in every situation you can. Sometimes that takeaway is what not to do, unfortunately, but sometimes the takeaway is a great thing. Last week I got the chance to go to ISJAC in Austin last week, and I got to hang with one of the people who we said like advice and that really didn't get advice from him, but Dave Ravello, who teaches at Eastman, and I used to hang a lot together. We'd just go get coffee when we were both doing our undergrad at Youngstown State. He was a senior when I was a freshman, and we had the best conversations over terrible coffee that were just like, did you hear this recording? Did you hear that? We were swapping records. Like it was just a great, he was a great role model for me and a great mentor to me, even though it was just an informal situation. So any of those kinds of situations you can get yourself into really are going to help shape you as a musician and push you along.
That's great.
Yeah. Alan, how about you?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Mike's saying, and I'll go down that same path. The relationships are critically important because so much of what we do is word of mouth. So, and my advice to students at North Texas is know what you want to do and then search out the people that are already doing that. So we have several people that want to move to Hollywood and move to LA, to get into the recording scene. All right. Well, fortunately, there's already UNT graduates there. Reach out to Dan Higgins, take him to coffee, see what's going on, see if that's really what you want to do. Ask him what his day is like, And so meeting, and it can be intimidating, but as we know on this call, at the top, the people are actually really nice for the most part. There are rare occasions where they're not friendly, but that all of our heroes and heroines are really genuine people. And that's one reason they're there. So I would recommend, and I do recommend that if you feel intimidated, go ahead and push through that and reach out to the people that you want to work with or that you aspire to be like. There's a lead trumpet player here now. Actually, it's a great story. The couple years ago, I guess in 2020, the lead trumpet player was here when Maria Schneider came down and performed with the band. And then she was in need for a lead trumpet player. She called me and said, "Hey, who's that guy with the handlebar mustache?" Chris Van Leeuwen. Yeah. That's the guy. He sounded amazing. I want him to, do this series of gigs.
Cool.
So that's how it worked. And then we have another lead trumpet player here now. That's her goal, is to play lead trumpet with Maria Schneider. Okay. That's your goal. Let's reach out to Maria Schneider. Let's talk to Nadia. And Nadia's going to be on campus next week, which is going to be wonderful. And so let's put your sound in front of Maria Schneider, so she knows that that's your goal. But it's working through the intimidation factor and reaching out to the people. And it's in any field. Okay, you want to be an electrical engineer? Who do you know that's doing that right now? Oh, my Uncle John. Hey, well, talk to your Uncle John. See what your day is like. See if that's really what you want to do. In music, it's really critically important. Just to talk to the people who are already doing what you aspire to do. It can inform you in many things. It's like, oh, geez, that guy gets up at 3 a.m. and doesn't get home until midnight. I don't know if I want to do that, but invariably it's like, oh my gosh. Like I remember the first time I met Maria Schneider, I felt a kindred spirit with her. It was because our output is different, but the process that we use it was so similar, and it was so inspiring to hang out with her and talk about writing. And again, she's a completely normal person. She's has a brilliant mind and a great businesswoman as well, but she's nice. She's very approachable. So, and that's the norm. It really is the norm and not the exception in our field.
That's awesome advice, and really, great stories you're all sharing. This is great. Rick, how about you? What advice do you have for an aspiring jazz musician or writer?
Well, I would say if you want to learn how to write, really, the best thing to do is get a piece of paper and get a pencil and start pushing it. Or Muse Score or whatever you use. I saw Mike has some manuscript paper on his piano shelf right there. I'm old school too. I write everything out by hand first. But however you do it, you write something and get it in front of musicians, get it on their stands, get them playing it. And when they play it, set up your phone with a voice recorder and record it. And then go back home and listen to it and figure out and listen to listen to the playback and try to identify what worked, meaning what was successful, what came off the way you thought it was going to come off, what came off better, because there are those occasional surprises, and then what didn't work. That's really the growth area. Identify what didn't work and then try to figure out why didn't that work? And it could, there are a lot of reasons why something may not work. One of them is because it's really difficult to execute on the instrument you wrote it for. So I'm a saxophone player. That's the instrument I know really well. So I pretty much know that every sax line I write is doable, because if I can do it, someone else can do it. And I'm not a virtuoso by any stretch. But when I'm writing for brass, if I have any question about it, something, if say I don't have the luxury to workshop a tune where it's a commission and I have to just finish it and send it off to the client, and whatever I send them is what I send them, then if I'm unsure about a trombone figure or a trumpet figure, I'll send it to a half a dozen friends who are pros on that instrument. And I'll say, hey, how's this? Does this lay okay? Is this okay for an 11th grader? Or whatever the case may be. And I'll just get their advice. So it kind of piggybacks a little bit of Alan's idea of the relationship. So these are friends of mine and people who I trust, and I can just call them up and say, hey, help me out here. And they're happy to, of course. But for me, that was the biggest process, was just writing music, having it played, recording it, trying to make the next one a little better. So
perfect. All right, we're going to close this out with a final question, and Rick, since you're on, we'll finish it with you. And this to me is, I think this is a good way to end, and I also think it's important for all of the students who just did the National Jazz Festival to hear, and that is from you. Why is jazz music so important to you, and what can we do to continue the tradition? Rick.
Yeah, it's like the hardest question of the day, and you make me start.
Yes.
So circling back to the first question you asked us about our inspiration, I remember being about 9 or 10 years old and having a mixtape that my dad made before they were called mixtapes. And it's what, he called real music. And it was like the rock and roll from the 50s and early 60s, probably just 50s, the Coasters, Bill Haley and the Comets. So on and so forth. And I remember listening to that music a lot. And the great thing about that music was almost all of it had tenor saxophone in it. And at the time, I maybe had just started playing saxophone in school, but there was certainly no connection between that. I did not connect those dots, but I think I just got that sound in my head. And I have grown to just love the sound of a lot of different types of jazz music. It's a comfort zone for me. The Beatles, if I put on the Beatles, that's a comfort place for me. We listen to music because it makes us feel a certain way, right? And I get a lot of reward from listening to music that falls under jazz. And what was the second part of your question?
What can we do to continue the tradition?
I would say honor the past of the music, honor the present of the music. Something I find myself relying on my students to keep me up to date sometimes on who's happening, because I'm still trying to figure out Ornette, or Horace Silver, or whatever it is, something that's just where my ear goes. But so I try to understand who's playing today and to a degree. And as a creator, as an improviser and a writer, I try not to just recreate, and I try to do what I can to come up with something that is maybe a little different. So the idea of just moving things forward a little bit.
Well, you already know how I feel about that. You are definitely successful in that regard, and I thank you for your contributions.
Thank you, Ted.
Yeah, Mike, how about you? Why is jazz music so important to you, and what can we do to continue that tradition?
Well, it's important to me because it's part of who I am. It's part of my DNA because of how important music was in my house growing up, and it also became an important role for my children as well. And I think that love of music that my father passed along, and I keep saying my father, and my mother and father passed along to me, and their love of jazz music in particular has just always just been a part of me, and it's something that I accepted at a young age, and it spoke to me for whatever reason at a young age, and it's just there for me. I alluded to concerts that my parents took me to, but our record collection had everything from like the early Louis Armstrong recordings and Baby Dodds and everybody that you can imagine out of that genre, all the way up through Coltrane and Thad Jones, Mel Lewis. I was with my dad when he bought the Thad and Mel Live at the Village Vanguard record. I was like in 8th grade. That was a life changer for me. So those type of things are just part of my being, and that's why jazz is important to me. Now, what can we do to support this tradition and keep it moving? I think keeping it alive in our schools has a lot to do with it. And events like the National Jazz Festival here, passing along the information, keep giving that feedback to students in a meaningful way, so that we're continuing the tradition of the music and encouraging it through festivals like this, and just keeping kids involved and making sure that our music educators in the schools are performing great music with the students. And I think this keeping that tradition alive is really focused on our schools right now, and getting kids interested. Like when Alan and I were and Rick, when we were all young, we had those go-to groups. Like for Alan and I, it was Buddy and Maynard, and especially Maynard, and that was kind of like a gateway for us, right, into other things. So I think that we don't have those people right now. So it's up to, well, we do to an extent, but we don't have like touring ensembles like you'd follow these guys around when we were kids, like follow them around like we were what am I trying to say?
Deadheads.
Yeah, okay. So we don't have that now. So we have to draw those connections to the kids, and it's never really actually been easier with all the social media and everything too. And with YouTube and things like that. So it's great. I share all kinds of performances with my students at school too. We have to help make that connection as educators. That's important.
Awesome. Words of wisdom. Thank you. Alan, why is jazz so important to you, and what can we do to continue the tradition?
Yeah, I'm glad I got to go third, because I can say, I was inspired by what both Rick and Mike said. It's important to me because I have an inner urge, no pun intended. I have an inner creative urge. And for me, that translates easily to jazz. I don't want to dismiss other genres like I would have done when I was much, much, much younger, out of my own ignorance. There is certainly creativity when you're playing a Haydn trumpet concerto, or playing a Bach cello concerto, or the unaccompanied suites. My wife's a cellist. I hear her play all the time. And there's creativity involved. But for me, the creativity that jazz allows is what feeds my inner creative urges, both as a writer and a recovering trumpet player, but mostly as a writer. And I think it's important for the students to explore that, but it's uniquely American also, and it makes you smarter, because it is, I think, harmonically clearly more advanced than early European classical music. Of course, there's stuff in every genre that is at the highest level. That's why the Grammy Awards give bluegrass artists Grammys, because there's incredible bluegrass being made. But for jazz musicians and for people who play in jazz band, not only are you honoring a truly American art form, but you're becoming smarter at the same time. And I think, the correlation between intelligence and music there's been dissertations written about it, and we see it all the time. We see it all the time, and that's one difficulty we have recruiting students for college, because so many of the wonderful, outstanding high school jazz musicians are also brilliant, and they might pursue medicine or engineering. There have been many examples of that when I do all states, and I'm like, what's your next plan? Oh, well, I'm going to go into nursing. Oh, okay, that's wonderful. But now, of course, they're informed musicians and they'll be better fans, which leads me to the next point. What we can do is more things like this, of course, getting the music in front of the younger people. And also, as I like what Rick mentioned about having their music heard as well. I think we do the students a disservice when we're too locked in and our own jazz snobs. Like, well, you're not checking out Thad Jones? What you're listening to that? They're not going to listen to us unless we listen to them. So I always encourage the students, and we did it, especially when the pandemic hit. Every Friday we'd have a listening session with the 1 o'clock lab band on Zoom, and everybody played two songs that they were checking out. And it was amazing, and my 3 children are all very musical. One's a professional bass player, and one is still in college and has a killing band that's doing a countrywide tour later this summer. And and they've always turned me on to great music. And although it might not fall under whatever we categorize jazz as, it inspires me to do what I do. And so I think it's important for us to not only put jazz in front of the students, but to listen to what they're listening to as well, with an open mind. And I think they'll be able to embrace what excites us even more.
I just want to say thank you to all 3 of you. I found the conversation extremely inspiring, and it's wonderful to know that there's educators in the world like the 3 of you, because clearly you're giving students what they need and are listening to them. And I think that's really wonderful advice that we got from all 3 of you today. So on behalf of SmartMusic and Alfred Publishing, thank you for participating in the National Jazz Festival, and also on behalf of the National Jazz Festival, thank you for your contributions to the students' performances and the compositions that were submitted. You guys are incredible. So thank you.